Hello, guys. It's the least favorite time in the footballing calendar, with a pointless international break in October. But don't worry, we have you covered here at the iTest FC studio. With the transfer window shut and having the chance to view the first few games of the Premier League season, we want to revisit our season predictions that we did back in August. So, with that being said, welcome to episode 9 of the iTest FC, updated Premier League predictions. Samarth, cheers.
Cheers.
We're getting used to that.
Yep. Bit by bit.
So, any changes to who your champions are?
Yeah, my biggest change is I think Arsenal are going to be the champions. That's more to do with how the season has panned out so far. And, we spoke about on our first episode about how much of an impact the transfer window is going to have on the set particular teams. And I think Arsenal have done really well getting in Mikel Merino, who will now finally get up and running after he's come back from injury. And speaking of injuries, I think the elephant in the room for Manchester City is the Rodri injury, also the Kevin De Bruyne injury that has affected them so far. But I think due to that aspect, Arsenal are currently the most suited to win the title in terms of having the same team built around the same squad for about 3 seasons running now. You have a manager who's fell short twice, so he knows the tactical tweaks he needs to make to push through. And you've gotten those new additions that'll keep the squad fresh. So I think for Arsenal's team now, it's basically, in my opinion, like now or never in terms of like this is the most likely they've come to seeing the team win a title. And yeah.
Yeah, I think I can't argue with that because I'm really happy that we both think Arsenal will win the league. That's my prediction as well at the start of the season. Of course, Arsenal are hit with injuries as well, with Odegaard out for a while. Also, what happens around Arsenal, right, with other teams have a huge impact. I think Rodri is the most important cog in the City machine, and if he's out for the season, I'm sure City will have an answer and a way to play around Rodri. They might also strengthen in January, but it depends how they go in the 8 games from now to December end. I have trust in the Arsenal team that they won't bottle a lead. But I think it needs to be a significant lead because City have the ability to, go from January to May without losing a single game. And we've both experienced that before. So I think I'm still cautious, but I think Arsenal can edge it based on what I've seen so far.
Yeah, it's almost like you have to win 26 out of 27 and get a 20-point lead before the world ends to win the Premier League against City. But yeah, I mean, coming to my team as well, I had, said Liverpool would finish above Arsenal. I think, and that was very ambitious at the time in terms of this was very much seen as a 2-horse race when we had started the league. I think the impact that Arne Slot has made in terms of, the first 10 games in all competitions, he's gotten 9 wins. That's an amazing start, more than most people would have expected out of him. I just think it comes back to the point of the transfer window where we basically didn't sign anybody. We signed a Chiesa who's going to be like a 5th attacking player. Like there's no creative change to the main lineup. So it's just these gaps, again, FSG falling through. But for Arne Slot to even be in a title race in his first year itself is quite some miracle. And if he is to finish above City like I've predicted, then that would be a miracle start, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, so for you, it's Arsenal, Liverpool, City as your top 3. So
my top 3.
So mine is Arsenal, City, Liverpool. And the only reason is, impressive start for Liverpool. And the fact that Liverpool are already in that conversation either means that Arne Slot inherited a very good team, or Arne Slot has done a fabulous job to get them to where they are, probably a bit of both. considering also the season before Klopp left, there was a huge like midfield rebuild. So I think Liverpool would be third, and it's amazing that they're third, because you see other teams where there's been a transition and they've struggled to get back to where they were for a few years. So great job to Anisad, but I think it's still a step too far to
To win
break
the league
into
in
that.
this first.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I still think they can finish second. And as you said, it's a bit of both. I think the place where Klopp has left this club is just tremendous in terms of not just the squad itself, but in terms of the new training facility and just the overall culture at the club that you see is tremendous. And also, to credit where credit is due to Arne Slot, you look at a single one of his interviews, and I have just been so impressed by the man. Even if you ask him what his opinion was about the team, he's always gonna talk about the mistakes. So it's always like he's keeping the team going in terms of not getting complacent. So that's very good to see. And I think it's more to do with the transfers. I think if Liverpool had made those one or two more signings, or if they do strengthen in January, then they can really have a title run as well.
All right, but who finishes off that to get that last Champions League spot for you?
So for me, and this was my biggest surprise of the year, which was Chelsea. I had said it at the start of the year as a very gut feeling, but now there is actually logic and reasoning behind it in Enzo Maresca and the impact that he's had on this Chelsea squad. There were a large amount of doubts about the number of players in that Chelsea squad and how many extra players they have. And Maresca has kind of like refined that squad and, basically thought about the odd players that he wants to work with. And he's, going on and improving every single one of them. And I think Chelsea have had a good start to the season so far. And you can just see that team coming more and more into its own. So I'm going to go with Chelsea to finish off the Champions League.
Yeah, I think this is one of those where you get bragging rights for calling it early. Uh, I think Chelsea's success does not only have to do with Maresca, although I've heard a lot of great things about him. A couple of other points that really caught my eye with Chelsea is in the summer they let Ian Maatsen go to Aston Villa and wanted John Duran in exchange. So it also shows that their scouting department are actually looking for the right players, the right profiles, and Chelsea are exciting to watch, and that's really okay. Not great to see as an Arsenal fan, but it's really nice to see as a neutral watching a Chelsea game. However, I don't personally think that they have the consistency to finish in the top four,
Okay.
and therefore I think Villa will still finish in the top four as I earlier predicted, but I do think they'll pip Spurs to the fifth spot.
Okay.
Because they have that talent, they have the ability to get 5 goals in an away game out of nowhere, and I don't think Spurs have that yet.
Okay. So I'm actually going to go for Spurs fifth, and I'm going to remain true to my words about Aston Villa. I think even if you see already their performances in the Champions League beating Bayern, I had said that Emery is an amazing knockout coach, and I think they'll go on to do better in the Champions League, and because of that, due to the intensity of the games, they'll suffer in the Premier League.
Yeah, I think I understand what you mean, because they beat Bayern and drew to Ipswich, drew to Man United. I think it's a bit harsh because of the injuries they have in their squad to keep players in their first
Yeah.
11. Also, this is something we touched about Tottenham in earlier episodes, where they've spent a lot of money, but they've spent a lot of money on inexperienced, unproven Premier League players,
Yeah.
which probably will be good for them in their cup competition, but probably not in the Premier League. So that's my top five.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think with Spurs, even Angie's, I think, a good coach. He has at least a get set gameplay that he wants to play. Definitely improvements to be made in terms of the consistency. Like, I think just last week against Brighton with a 2-goal lead, I think you should have the defensive character to carry out a win. Or even worst case, a draw. I think losing to a Brighton side after a 2-goal lead is not great. So definitely improvements to be made. But I think the fourth, fifth, sixth bracket just becomes always such a mush at the end, where at least in the last couple of years in the Premier League, it's by the end, it's been like, okay, who wants it less, because everyone just seems to keep losing and the other one just keeps coming up, and it just becomes like a very gray area, which I think it will be once again. But with that being said, who's going to be a surprise team of the year?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to change my Premier League predictions because it's only been 7 games. So I think, as I said, for Villa to break into that top six juggernaut once is impressive, but twice is almost unheard of in modern
Yeah.
football in the Premier League. And if they were to do it as I'm predicting, I think they should be the biggest surprise. I think that outweighs any other team can do from a delta and points.
Fair enough. I had gone for Chelsea, who, I mean, if they're going to break in the top four, then that is kind of surprising. But the team that has surprised me way more this year, I would say, is Nottingham Forest, in that they've come into the Premier League and, really shown that they can hang with the big boys. Like, they've beat Liverpool at Anfield, the only defeat that Slot suffered yet. And even, the point against Chelsea, and just overall gameplay, I think Nottingham have been really good.
That's a really good shout, actually. And I think, Nuno Espirito Santo's Wolves team is probably what now people are calling in Twitter like Barclays men kind of team. And I think he got the Tottenham job and his reputation took a hit. Went to Saudi Arabia, came back. And I'm really happy to see him do well trying to create that kind of team.
I mean, speaking of Nuno and that Wolves team, I think my biggest disappointment of the year so far has to be Wolves, where you would not expect Wolves to be in the 20th position. They've had a very tough start, don't get me wrong. And I said this when they played Liverpool as well, that they really gave Liverpool problems and it was not an easy victory. But you would expect better from this Wolves side. Like a couple games, sure, but I think into mid-October now, to see your team bottom of the league when Everton is present is is just really disappointing. So I'll go for Wolves.
That's fair. I completely agree. I don't think they're a 20th position team. I think they have much more quality to do better. But for me, Glasner did such a great job at Crystal Palace in the second half of last season when he came in. And I understand they have had like Olise who left and stuff, but they have strengthened their team with significant funding. Still in the relegation zone, not really done anything to, write home about, impress. So previously, my biggest disappointment was a terrible shout in Brentford, who
Brentford
taken to the Premier League this year like a fish in water. But yeah, I just got that wrong, and I think it's Palace from the first 7 games as my biggest disappointment.
Speaking of a Brentford player, I had gone for one as my biggest surprise as the player, which was Fabio Carvalho. But unfortunately, he's just not getting the game time that you would like to see. And because of that, I'm going to shift and go back to my team in that defensive mid position, Ryan Gravenberch. An incredible run of games so far, and just extremely surprising because this is such a new role for him. He was a very box to box come attacking midfielder for Ajax, for Bayern, and now to go and take all of those defensive roles in this Liverpool squad has been really influential in their successful start so far.
Yeah, I think a lot of Liverpool fans are quite happy with his performance. I think Arne Slot is quite familiar with his strengths, being Dutch as well. So fair enough. I want to keep my prediction as Eliman and I've seen enough of his sparks with Everton to give me confidence that they will be safe at the end of the season. And I think he will have a big part to play in that. So I don't really want to change that prediction at all.
Yeah, he's been great already. So, we've already mentioned his name like in a couple of episodes.
Moving on to like biggest disappointment. I've also not changed anything. So I've continued to go with Maddison. And I know it's Arsenal fan talking about Tottenham player as a disappointment. I understand he has chipped in with a few goals. But for me, I look at this as Maddison being that player to take Tottenham to, Champions League position. For me, that's a successful season for Tottenham. I don't think
Okay.
he's going to get top 5. And if they don't get top 5, I think Maddison, who injuries permitting will probably be ever present in that team, will underperform. And if he
Okay.
underperforms, he's my biggest disappointment. So it's more about that more than the stats and the goals assists that he contributes.
That's a fair shout. I'm gonna go like, and we've not spoken about United much, and this is us telling you guys that we're unbiased here. We could have easily kept that as the biggest disappointment because they're 14th in the league already. So I think, but finally coming to the United team, my biggest disappointment, I'm gonna go with Kobe Menu. At the start of the season, I'd gone for Dillett, and I'm not saying that Dillett has been like great to begin with. It could have been that, but I didn't want to approach it from just a new transfer perspective. And I've spoken about this before with Kobe Mainu that you know an English player has like a purple patch, and the English media hype
Right,
him
right,
up.
right.
It's also like for England, if you're starting over the likes of players like Trent and Cole Palmer, then that puts you in a very elite bracket. You're going to be a driving force behind your squad doing well. And he's just been dreadful. Like, he has just not performed in a single game so far. And it's not even like his technical abilities, it's more the hunger, the commitment, the kind of impact that you would want for a young midfielder who's broken through in a team as big as Manchester United to have. He's just been very lackluster. So I think just because of his mentality rather than his technical ability, I'm going to go for Kobe Mainu.
Well, it's harsh that we're calling an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old a disappointment, but I kind of agree, right? Like, how it depends on if you start for Man United, if you start for England week in, week out, certain performances are expected. I think Meno has time on his hand to turn it around,
For
but
sure.
but I think if you look at a team that's 14th in the Premier League and that team is the great Manchester United, uh, of
That's
course,
very disappointing.
it is disappointing, which is completely fair. But now moving on to Player of the Year, right? PFA Player of the Year. Now
The big question.
this is a huge question, and I want to first start by talking about what that award is, because I just don't understand completely clearly like individual awards in football to begin with. Like, I have had problems with the Ballon d'Or. I don't understand this Player of the Year, like how it's really selected. Like, did Foden really stand out in a Man City team last season? It could have been anyone in the City team.
Should have
And
been
I
Rodri, if you ask
should
me.
have been Rodri. I think he's the most
Okay.
influential as well. If I say Arsenal are to win the league, uh, I actually do think that David Raya. Previously, I said
Oh,
Saliba. I think Saliba might actually win it because there's a lot of positive press around him. But I think purely, if you ask me my opinion and not what will actually be voted for, I think David Raya could be, because he's been brilliant this season. It feels like he can do everything. So I would say David Raya is my Player of the Year. What about you?
fair enough. Like, like we say that individual awards have become so trophy dependent. It's almost become like the team that wins the league kind of has to win, unless someone has like an insane season. Like last time Salah or like Van Dijk, or even actually when we won the league, De Bruyne won it. But it's basically, for me, if I'm going to say that Arsenal are going to be the champions, the best thing about Arsenal is that they don't have any superstar. It's not like there is one player in that team that you can pinpoint to and say that, okay, it's just, he's had the biggest impact on this team. I think Arsenal are a very cohesive unit. So it's, unless, Saka, it really elevates his goal scoring form this year, where he's had the most assists. Now, if he can chip in with the goals, or if Havertz maybe has that, 25 odd goal season with the assists, it's very hard. I would personally not go for Saliba because I already think Van Dijk's having a much better season. So in terms of a CB to CB comparison, then that just wouldn't seem right. But I think I'm going to go for Cole Palmer, where if I look at a player just as an individual player that is elevating his squad the most, a player through which a team is benefiting the most, I think now that Rodri is injured, I would have to go with Cole Palmer. I already think Palmer had a much better season than Foden last year. Like, I see no
Yeah.
logic to Foden winning at all actually last year.
Yeah, exactly, right. I think these individual awards are like, we can approach it in one of two ways, right? Who we think will actually win it, or who we think is genuinely going to be the best player of the year. And I think both of us previously predicted who we think would actually win it based on like player votes. But I think
Yeah.
now we're moving towards who we think would be the most influential player in the Premier League. And I think that's a very good way to end the episode.
For
Uh,
sure.
I think next week the Premier League is back uh, again for a short
Back with a
few weeks.
bang.
Back with a bang, short
Back
few weeks before another pointless international break in November.
break.
But
But we have a run of some amazing games coming up. We have Liverpool versus Chelsea. Then we're going to have Liverpool versus Arsenal at the Emirates. We're going to have the Chelsea United game and a couple big games for the next few weeks. So it's going to be some exciting times ahead.
yeah, so tune in to the iTest FC. And until next week, see you.
See you guys.